conference room felt different when I walked in. My manager Felix sat rigid in his chair, while Maria from HR shuffled papers with fake sympathy in her eyes. Just a casual check-in, Felix had said over Slack, but nothing about this felt casual. Valerie, we need to discuss some concerns, Maria began, her voice unnaturally gentle. My stomach dropped. She opened a manila folder thick with printed emails. Your teammates have raised some issues about your work style. The words hit like ice water. Too controlling. Not collaborative enough. Makes others feel inadequate. Each phrase was a knife twist from people I'd trained, helped, and covered for countless times. Felix avoided my eyes. We want to support you, but there's a pattern here. His voice cracked slightly. He knew this was wrong, but he was going through with it anyway. I sat frozen, watching my career dissolve in real time. The people I'd mentored, the late nights I'd worked to fix their mistakes, the promotions I'd helped them earn, none of it mattered now. What are the next steps? I asked quietly, my voice surprisingly steady. Maria's smile was razor thin. That depends entirely on how much you're willing to improve. Walking back to my desk felt like a death march. The open office buzzed with its usual energy, but something had shifted. Eyes darted away when I looked up. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when I passed by. At my workstation, I stared at my screen without seeing it. The project files I'd built from scratch mocked me. The efficiency reports showing record numbers felt meaningless. Everything I'd poured my heart into suddenly felt hollow. Riley, who I'd trained for 6 months, was huddled with 2 other teammates near the printer. When I glanced over, they scattered like startled birds. The betrayal cut deeper than any performance review ever could. I finished my tasks mechanically, muscle memory carrying me through. Each email felt like evidence against me. Every meeting invite felt like a trap. By 5 o'clock, I was emotionally drained. Josh was cooking dinner when I stumbled through our apartment door. One look at my face, and he dropped the wooden spoon. What happened? He asked, wrapping me in his arms. I broke down completely. Between sobs, I told him everything. His jaw tightened with each detail. They're idiots, he said simply. Complete idiots. Sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction from the past month. Had I missed the warning signs? Was I really too controlling? The questions circled endlessly. At 2 a.m., I gave up and opened my laptop. The blue glow hurt my tired eyes, but I needed a distraction. I scrolled through old emails, looking for something, anything, that made sense. Then I found it. Buried in a folder marked Opportunities, there was an email from 2 years ago. Phoebe Martinez, my former mentor, offering me a director position at her new firm. I'd turned it down because I was loyal to my current team. The offer stands indefinitely, her email had said. You're exactly what we need here, Valerie. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. My cursor hovered over the reply button. Phoebe had always believed in me. She'd never made me feel like I was too much or too demanding. Under her leadership, I'd thrived. But hitting reply felt like admitting defeat, like running away instead of fighting. Josh stirred beside me. Can't sleep? I closed the laptop without responding. Just thinking. About what? I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to voice what I was considering. The next morning brought fresh humiliation. Felix called me into his office with news that made my chest tight. We're reassigning the Moonlight Project, he said, not meeting my eyes. The Moonlight Project was my baby. I'd spent 8 months building it from a single paragraph brief into a comprehensive strategy. The client specifically requested my involvement after our initial pitch. Who's taking over? I asked, though I already suspected. Riley will lead it going forward. Felix shuffled papers nervously. This will give you space to focus on team dynamics and collaboration. Riley. The same person who'd come to me crying 6 months ago because he couldn't handle his workload. The person I'd stayed late every Friday to train. The person who was probably celebrating in the break room right now. I understand, I said calmly. Felix looked surprised by my composure. Great. Riley might need some transition support, so please make yourself available. I nodded and walked back to my desk. An hour later, Riley appeared beside me, looking sheepish. Hey, about the Moonlight thing, he started. I know it's weird, but maybe you could walk me through the client requirements? I looked at him for a long moment. The old me would have said yes immediately. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said politely, then turned back to my screen. You've been trained to see your silence as strength, my therapist said during our weekly session. But silence can also be self-abandonment. The words hit harder than I expected. I'd always prided myself on being the calm one, the reliable one. While others complained or caused drama, I put my head down and worked. What would happen if you advocated for yourself, she asked. I'd be seen as difficult, I replied automatically. Demanding, not a team player. She leaned forward. And how's being the perfect team player working out for you? That night, I started journaling, not to document what others did wrong, but to remember who I was before this job ground me down. I wrote about my achievements, my goals, my values, page after page of reminders that I was more than this broken dynamic. The act of writing felt liberating. For years, I'd absorbed every criticism and internalized every slight. But seeing my accomplishments in black and white reminded me of something crucial. I was good at my job, exceptionally good. The problem wasn't my skills or my attitude. The problem was that my excellence made others uncomfortable. And instead of rising to meet my level, they decided to tear me down. Writing that truth felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. 3 days of internal debate ended with a single click. I opened Phoebe's email and hit reply before I could change my mind. Hi Phoebe, I hope you're well. I've been thinking about our conversation from 2 years ago. If the opportunity is still available, I'd love to discuss it. Best regards, Valerie. I stared at the sent message for a full minute, my heart racing. There was no taking it back now. Her response came within 2 hours. Valerie, I've been hoping you'd reach out. The position is still open. We've been waiting for the right person. Are you free for coffee this week? I have so much to tell you. Reading her enthusiasm felt like stepping into sunlight after months in a cave. Phoebe had always made me feel valued, capable, brilliant. Under her mentorship, I'd produced my best work because she trusted me to succeed. I replied immediately, yes, I'd love to meet, name the time and place. Her next message made me smile for the first time in weeks. How about tomorrow at 10 a.m., the cafe on 5th Street? We have a lot to catch up on. I closed my laptop, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Maybe there was life beyond this toxic environment. Maybe I didn't have to prove myself to people who were determined not to see my worth. Phoebe looked exactly the same, sharp blazer, knowing smile, the kind of presence that commanded respect without demanding it. She stood when she saw me, pulling me into a warm hug. You look tired, she said gently, studying my face as we sat down. It's been a rough few months, I admitted, surprised by my honesty. She ordered us coffee and listened as I explained the situation. Her expression grew darker with each detail. When I finished, she shook her head in disgust. They're intimidated, she said simply. You're operating at a level they can't reach, so they're trying to drag you down instead of elevating themselves. The validation felt overwhelming. For months, I'd questioned my own perceptions, wondering if I really was the problem. The offer still stands, Phoebe continued. Director of Strategic Operations, full autonomy over your projects. East Coast location, but will cover relocation. 30% salary increase plus equity. My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as I set it down. That's generous. You're worth it, Valerie. You always have been. She slid a business card across the table. Take a week to think about it, but don't let fear keep you in a place that doesn't value you. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. The freeze-out intensified over the next few days. Colleagues who used to chat by my desk now walked past without acknowledgement. Meeting invitations arrived without me included. Lunch plans happened around me, not with me. The silence was deliberate and pointed. In the break room, conversations stopped when I entered. Email chains continued without my input. Even simple greetings went unanswered. I tried confronting Amanda, someone I'd considered a friend. Is everything okay between us? I asked after a particularly cold interaction. She looked uncomfortable, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Look, Valerie, you just make things hard sometimes. The way you operate, it's a lot. What do you mean? You know what you did on the Peterson account, taking over like that, making the rest of us look bad. I stared at her. The Peterson account had been failing when I stepped in. I'd saved it, working weekends to fix problems that weren't mine to solve. I was trying to help, I said quietly. Maybe help less, she replied, then walked away. I stood alone in the break room, finally understanding the depth of their resentment. It wasn't about my attitude or my collaboration skills. It was about my competence threatening their mediocrity. That evening, Josh found me staring out our kitchen window, lost in thought. He'd been patient with my mood swings, listening without judgment as I processed the workplace drama. You don't have to stay to prove a point, Em, he said gently, using his pet name for me. That place got lucky with you. They just don't know it. I'm scared, I admitted. What if I'm running away? What if they're right about me? He turned me to face him, his hands warm on my shoulders. In the 3 years I've known you, I've watched you save projects, mentor people, and work yourself to exhaustion for a company that takes you for granted. You're not the problem here. His certainty was comforting, but doubt still gnawed at me. Starting over feels impossible. New city, new team, new everything. You've conquered worse, he reminded me. Remember your first week at the current job? You were terrified then too, but you became their best performer within 6 months. That night, we talked about possibilities instead of problems. Josh was willing to relocate, excited even. His remote work arrangement made geography irrelevant. Phoebe's offer is a gift, he said. Don't let pride make you refuse it. Since when is taking a better job about pride? Since you started thinking you have to suffer to prove your worth. Monday brought an unexpected announcement. The annual internal audit was being moved up by 2 months. The news sent ripples of panic through the office. But Felix approached me directly. We need you to lead the audit prep, he said, his tone more respectful than it had been in weeks. Your documentation systems are the most thorough, and frankly, we can't afford any mistakes. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who'd complained about my thoroughness now needed it desperately. I accepted the assignment professionally, without commentary on the obvious contradiction. As I began pulling together the required materials, I realized how dependent the team had become on my organizational systems. Every major process, every backup protocol, every emergency procedure, I'd created or improved most of them. The audit required documentation going back 3 years, files that only I knew how to locate, processes that only I fully understood, client relationships that only I had maintained. Let's keep this low-key, Felix warned as I compiled the initial report. We don't want you overstepping again. Overstepping, the audit that could make or break our department, and they were worried about me taking too much initiative. I nodded calmly. Of course, I'll just focus on the requirements. While organizing audit materials, I stumbled across an old presentation folder buried deep in the shared drive. The file was labeled Q3 Strategy Presentation, v Moonlight, with a date from 18 months ago. Opening it brought back memories of late nights and weekend research. I'd built this presentation from scratch, developing a new client retention model that became the foundation for our current strategy. The footnotes showed its impact. 40% improvement in client satisfaction, 25% increase in contract renewals, and recognition from corporate leadership. It had become the template for presentations across 3 different departments. But my name had been quietly removed from later versions. The model was now referred to as the team approach, or our collaborative strategy. My individual contribution had been erased from the company narrative. I closed the file without saying anything to anyone. What was the point? The work spoke for itself, even if the credit had been redistributed. Still, finding it felt like discovering buried treasure. Here was concrete proof of my value, untainted by committee revision or collective ownership. I'd created something lasting and meaningful, regardless of who got recognition. The audit preparation continued, but that presentation file reminded me of something important. My best work had always happened when I trusted my instincts and stopped seeking approval. The elevator was crowded during the morning rush, and I'd squeezed into the back corner. 2 teammates from my floor stood near the front, unaware I was behind them. She's finally shutting up, one said quietly. Took her long enough. I know, right? Those meetings are actually tolerable now. She's not jumping in every 5 minutes with corrections. They laughed softly, the sound sharp in the enclosed space. I pressed myself against the wall, hoping they wouldn't turn around. Think Felix will actually fire her? Probably not. but at least she knows her place now. The elevator dinged at my floor, and they stepped off, still chuckling. I waited until the door started closing before following them out. Walking to my desk, their words echoed in my head. My silence wasn't growth or improvement, it was surrender. I'd stopped advocating for my ideas, stopped correcting obvious mistakes, stopped being myself. For weeks, I'd tried to become smaller, quieter, less threatening, and they were celebrating it like a victory. Something shifted inside me as I sat down at my workstation. A clarity I hadn't felt in months. These people didn't want me to improve, they wanted me to disappear. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and typed a message to Phoebe. "I'm ready. Let's do this." Phoebe's response came within minutes. "Wonderful. I'll have contracts drawn up immediately. Can you start in 4 weeks?" 4 weeks. Enough time for a proper transition, but not so long that I'd lose my nerve. I replied, "Perfect. I'll submit my notice next Monday." For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The constant knot in my stomach loosened. The weight on my shoulders lifted. I wasn't running away. I was running towards something better. Josh noticed the change immediately when I got home. "You look different," he said, studying my face. "Lighter." I called Phoebe. I took the job. His smile could have powered the city. That's amazing. When do you start?" 4 weeks from Monday. Are you sure you're okay with relocating?" "Are you kidding? I'm thrilled. This apartment is too small anyway, and I've always wanted to try the East Coast." We spent the evening researching neighborhoods and planning our move. After months of feeling trapped, the future suddenly felt full of possibilities. Before bed, I drafted my resignation letter, professional, gracious, and final. 2 weeks' notice, as required by my contract. Reading it over, I felt a sense of completion. This chapter of my life was ending, but I was choosing how it concluded. I set my notice date strategically, 2 weeks before the audit deadline. Not out of malice, but because the timing worked for my new position. Phoebe needed me to start by the 1st of the month, which meant leaving during the audit preparation. The irony was poetic. They'd need me most right when I'd be walking away. I began organizing my files with extra care, creating detailed documentation for every project and process. Whoever inherited my responsibilities would have clear instructions and comprehensive notes. This wasn't about sabotage, it was about professionalism. I wanted to leave with my reputation intact, regardless of how they'd treated me. My project files were meticulously labeled, my client contacts were properly documented, my process improvements were clearly explained. Everything was organized for a smooth transition, but I wasn't going to train my replacement or work overtime to compensate for poor planning. I'd fulfill my contracted obligations and nothing more. The audit materials were nearly complete, arranged in folders that any competent professional could follow. Whether my teammates were competent remained to be seen. Friday afternoon, I printed my resignation letter and sealed it in an envelope. Monday morning, I'd hand it to Felix and begin my countdown to freedom. Felix's paranoia had been building all week. He'd started watching me more closely, asking pointed questions about my workload and future plans. Friday afternoon, he cornered me near my desk. "Are you planning to leave?" he asked bluntly, his voice low but urgent. I looked up from my computer, keeping my expression neutral. "When there's something to announce, you'll be the first to know." His face flushed slightly. "Valerie, if you're considering other options, we should discuss retention strategies. Maybe additional responsibilities, a title change." "I appreciate your concern," I replied politely, "but right now I'm focused on the audit preparation." He hovered awkwardly, clearly wanting to press further, but unsure how. Finally, he retreated to his office, leaving me to finish my work in peace. Amanda watched the exchange from across the room, her expression unreadable. The office gossip network would be buzzing within hours, but I didn't care anymore. Let them speculate. Let them worry. After months of uncertainty and manipulation, it felt good to hold information they desperately wanted. That weekend, Josh and I toured apartments online, researching our new city and planning our future. The contrast between my current anxiety-filled work environment and our hopeful discussions was stark. Change was coming, whether they were ready or not. The breaking point came during Tuesday's team meeting. I was presenting audit findings when Riley interrupted me mid-sentence. We're doing things differently now, he said with obvious smugness. Maybe just let it go. The room fell silent. Even Felix looked uncomfortable with Riley's tone, but no one corrected him or asked him to elaborate. I stopped talking and nodded calmly. Of course. For the rest of the meeting, I sat quietly while Riley stumbled through explanations he clearly didn't understand. When asked direct questions, I referred them to other team members. The old me would have jumped in to help, correcting mistakes and filling knowledge gaps. But why? They'd made it clear my input wasn't welcome. After the meeting, I returned to my desk and opened my laptop. Phoebe's contract was waiting in my inbox, formal and official. I reviewed every clause carefully, then signed it electronically. That evening, I sealed my resignation letter in a fresh envelope and placed it in my work bag. Tomorrow, this charade would end. Josh found me standing on our balcony, looking out at the city lights. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Free," I said simply. "Finally free." Monday morning, I arrived early and placed my resignation letter on Felix's desk before anyone else arrived. 2 weeks' notice, professional language, no detailed explanations. When Felix found it at 8:30, his face went white. He called me into his office immediately, waving the letter like evidence of betrayal. "This is very sudden," he said, his voice tight with panic. "I've given the required 2 weeks' notice," I replied calmly. "My last day will be Friday the 18th. "But the audit, you're leading the audit. All materials are organized and clearly documented. Any qualified professional should be able to continue the work." He stammered about transition time and knowledge transfer, but I remained polite and firm. Maria from HR arrived within minutes, clearly having been summoned urgently. "We'd like to discuss retention options," she said, pulling out forms I'd never seen before. "Thank you, but my decision is final," I replied. "I'm happy to ensure a smooth transition during my remaining time here." The desperation in their voices was obvious, but it came too late. For months, they'd treated me like a problem to be managed. Now, they wanted to treat me like an asset to be retained. I left their office feeling lighter than air. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of panic and scrambling. With the audit deadline approaching and me leaving, the team suddenly realized how much they'd relied on my systems and knowledge. Riley appeared at my desk every few hours with questions about files he couldn't locate or processes he didn't understand. I answered politely, but didn't volunteer additional information. "Where are the backup files for the Moonlight project?" he asked Friday morning. "In the shared drive under Client Files, then Moonlight, then Archive," I replied without looking up from my computer. "I can't find the risk assessment templates." "They're in the templates folder, organized by project type." Each interaction highlighted how little attention they'd paid to the infrastructure I'd built. They'd used my systems daily without understanding how they worked. Amanda tried a different approach, asking if I'd be available for phone consultations after leaving. "Just in case questions come up," she said hopefully. "I'll be starting a new position immediately," I replied. "But everything is well documented." Felix grew increasingly frantic as my departure date approached. He'd been counting on my expertise to navigate the audit, and now he faced it without me. I maintained my professional demeanor throughout, fulfilling my obligations without exceeding them. Wednesday of my final week, Felix made one last desperate attempt to change my mind. He called me into his office with what he clearly thought was an irresistible offer. "We're prepared to offer you a promotion," he said, sliding a paper across his desk. "Senior analyst, 15% salary increase, and additional support for your projects." I read the offer carefully. It was everything I'd hoped for 6 months ago, when I still believed this environment could change. "Thank you," I said, sliding the paper back. "But I've already accepted another position." His face fell. "Can we match their offer? Exceed it?" "This isn't about money, Felix. It's about finding a place where my contributions are valued." "Your contributions are valued here." I looked at him steadily. "Are they? Because 3 weeks ago you had me in a disciplinary meeting based on complaints that I was too effective at my job." He had no response to that. The promotion offer was admission that they'd misjudged me, but it came too late. "My last day is Friday," I reminded him. "I'll make sure everything is properly transitioned." He nodded reluctantly, finally accepting that I was beyond persuasion. Walking back to my desk, I felt a profound sense of closure. My final week coincided with the audit's most intensive phase. The external auditors arrived Monday morning, requesting files and explanations that only I fully understood. I watched from my desk as Riley and Amanda scrambled to locate documents and explain processes they'd never bothered to learn. Felix ran between his office and the conference room, looking increasingly stressed. The lead auditor, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia, kept asking for me specifically. "Where's the person who designed these systems?" she inquired after Riley fumbled through a presentation about our risk management protocols. "She's transitioning out," Felix replied weakly. Patricia's eyebrows rose. "This week? During your audit?" I continued my work quietly, helping when directly asked, but not volunteering to save them from their poor planning. The audit materials were complete and properly organized. If they couldn't present them effectively, that wasn't my responsibility. Thursday afternoon, the auditors identified several gaps in documentation, areas where verbal knowledge hadn't been properly recorded. These were things I knew instinctively but had never been asked to document formally. The panic in Felix's eyes was visible from across the room, but my departure date remained unchanged. Friday morning brought news that would have devastated me months earlier, but now felt like distant thunder. Word leaked through the gossip network. Leadership was unhappy with the audit results. Several major compliance gaps had been identified, largely due to the team's inability to properly explain systems I'd developed. The external auditors had noted insufficient knowledge transfer and poor process documentation in their preliminary report. Emergency meetings were called. Department leadership demanded explanations. The finger-pointing began immediately. Riley blamed insufficient transition time. Amanda blamed complex systems that were too hard to understand. Felix blamed the accelerated audit timeline. No one blamed their decision to marginalize the person who'd created the systems they were failing to explain. From my desk, I watched the chaos with detached interest. These were the same people who'd celebrated my silence just weeks earlier. Now my absence was creating exactly the problems they should have anticipated. Two of my harshest critics were called into closed-door meetings with senior management. The same people who'd complained about my controlling behavior were now being questioned about their readiness to handle critical responsibilities. As I packed my final belongings, I felt no satisfaction in their struggle. Just relief that it was no longer my problem to solve. My last day was surprisingly peaceful. I completed my final status reports, organized my desk, and prepared detailed handover notes for whoever would inherit my workspace. Several colleagues stopped by to say goodbye, including some who'd barely spoken to me in months. The conversations were awkward but civil. "I wish I'd treated you better," Amanda said quietly, hovering near my desk as I packed. I looked up at her, considering my response. "I wish you had too," I said simply. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "You were just so good at everything. It made the rest of us feel stupid." "That was never my intention," I replied gently. "I was just trying to do my job well." "I know, I'm sorry." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd receive, and it was enough. Felix appeared at 4:30 with final paperwork and a strained smile. "Good luck in your new position," he said, though his tone suggested he hoped I'd fail spectacularly. "Thank you," I replied politely. At 5 p.m. exactly, I walked out of the building for the last time, carrying a small box of personal items and a profound sense of freedom. Starting at Phoebe's firm felt like stepping into an alternate universe. On my first day, I was greeted with genuine enthusiasm and respect. My new team was excited to learn from me, not threatened by my expertise. "We've been waiting for someone with your background," my new colleague Tyler said during orientation. "The projects we have lined up are perfect for your skill set." Phoebe introduced me to the leadership team as the strategic genius we've been trying to recruit for years. There was no qualification, no disclaimer about my personality or work style, just appreciation for my abilities. My office had a window, a real door, and space to spread out complex projects. The technology was current, the resources abundant, and the atmosphere collaborative without being constraining. "You don't have to prove anything here," Phoebe told me during our first one-on-one meeting. "Just be yourself and do what you do best." The freedom was almost overwhelming after months of walking on eggshells. When I made suggestions in meetings, people listened and asked thoughtful questions. When I identified problems, they thanked me instead of getting defensive. By the end of my first week, I realized how much energy I'd been spending on managing other people's insecurities instead of focusing on my actual work. 2 months into my new position, Josh forwarded me an article from our old city's business journal. The headline read, "Local firm undergoes major restructuring after failed audit." I read the details with detached interest. My former company had received significant penalties for compliance failures. Several managers had been demoted or reassigned. The audit had revealed systemic gaps in process management and knowledge retention. Felix was no longer department head. Riley had been moved to a junior role. Amanda had left for another company entirely. The article mentioned recent departures of key personnel as a contributing factor to the audit failures, but didn't name names. I was grateful for the anonymity. A text from an old colleague confirmed the details. "Everything fell apart after you left. They finally realized what they lost, but it was too late." I felt no glee at their downfall, just a quiet satisfaction that the truth had finally surfaced. My value hadn't been imaginary or inflated. It had been real and quantifiable. Setting down my phone, I returned to the strategic plan I was developing for Phoebe's biggest client. This work energized me in ways my old job never had. The past was truly behind me now. 6 months later, I found myself back in my old city for a conference. Walking past my former office building during lunch, I paused at the familiar entrance, but didn't go inside. Through the glass windows, I could see the bustling lobby where I'd once felt so trapped. Security guards I recognized nodded politely, not realizing who I was. My new life was everything I'd hoped for and more. The work challenged me intellectually without draining me emotionally. My colleagues respected my expertise without resenting my success. Phoebe had promoted me twice, recognizing contributions that my old team had tried to suppress. Josh loved our new city, having found an amazing friend group through his rock climbing hobby. We'd bought a house with actual space, traded our cramped apartment for something that felt like home. Standing on the sidewalk, I realized I felt nothing but gratitude for the experience that had nearly broken me. Being pushed out had forced me to value myself properly and pursue opportunities I'd been too comfortable to consider. I didn't burn bridges when I left. I'd simply outgrown them. My phone buzzed with a text from Phoebe. "Client loved your presentation. Ready to discuss that VP position we talked about?" Smiling, I typed back, "Absolutely." Then I walked away from my past and toward my future, finally understanding that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well.